Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle, and this is my 17th video discussing 1950s British science fiction paperbacks. Now, we've been mainly looking at the Mushroom publishers who commissioned original science fiction novels. But as the post-war paper shortages eased, so other established publishers began to enter the field with their own science fiction novels. In this video, we'll take a look at one of these publishers. By 1953, John Cornell's Authors Consortium, Nova Publications, had successfully established the two pioneering science fiction magazines, New Worlds and Science Fantasy. They announced their plans, as you see here from this house advertisement, announces their plans for a new series of paperback novels, Nova science fiction novels, to reprint carefully selected and previously published superior hardcovers. Now, because the paperback novels generally sold at 1 6 and the magazines were priced at 2 shillings, Nova decided to look for a new, cheaper printer and paper supplier to handle their increased production at a uniform price of 1 6. They finally found a new printer, Carlton Press, who were engaged to produce their next issue of New Worlds, number 21, you see here, and the first Nova novel, Stowaway to Mars by John Beynon. Now, this book was a retitling of a pre-war book by the author, his second science fiction novel, Planet Plane, published by George Newnes. See the original hardcover edition here, and if we look at the opening page, we can see that for this edition they used a much smaller typeface. This was necessary in order to contain this longish novel into the 128-page format. But this edition by the new publisher, Carlton Press, was a disappointment to John Cornell. It had the ugly, cheap staples beloved of the other Mushroom publishers, and the paper used was a low quality paper. However, it did have a quite nice cover by New Worlds artist Gordon Hutchings, and John Beynon was in fact the earlier pen name for the now famous John Wyndham, author of the best-selling The Day of the Triffids. So the book should have sold well. But the general public were unaware that Wyndham, full name John Wyndham Parks Lucas Beynon Harris, had written as John Beynon. The irony is that the John Beynon Harris had reinvented himself after the war and built up a new reputation as John Wyndham, and his pre-war byline of John Beynon was forgotten. So the novel sold poorly. Carlton Press delivered an even shoddier version of New Worlds. Number 21 was 2 months late in arriving. You remember, they'd announced that was coming in April, but when they delivered the issue, it was 2 months late, so they had to change the title to the date to June 1953. It was a shoddy production. You can see it's much smaller than the previous magazine, and it used a much inferior paper. So we see here from the former publisher, former printer rather, was able to use nice white paper to show the splendid scraper-board illustrations of Gerard Quinn to good advantage. But with the new printing setup. You can see here the yellowing, dingy paper, and the illustrations were lost. So Nova were very unhappy with this publisher, with this new printer rather. And when the next issue, number 22, was delivered, also weeks late, and so shoddy that Cornell and Nova Publications refused to accept or pay for it. It resulted in a court case, which Nova won, and Carlton Press had to destroy their entire print run. The Nova novels line was aborted, and the planned advertised second title by American author Malcolm Jamison never appeared. Now, the redoubtable John Cornell not only managed to find a more reliable new printer, but also found an established publisher, McLaren Publications, who recapitalized Nova and took over ownership of the two magazines, appointing John Cornell as their full-time editor. Under McLaren, the two magazines flourished, so that by autumn 1954, Cornell decided to relaunch the Nova Novels series. And here we see the announcements that appeared in the magazine. The first two announced were high-quality American reprints: The Weapon Shops of Isher by A.E. Van Voort and The City and the Sea by Wilson Tucker. They were to be followed in February 1955 by two more American reprints: The Dreaming Jewels by Theodore Sturgeon, one of his finest novels, and Jack of Eagles by James Blish. Here we see the first four Nova novels. Now, John Cornell recalled what happened next in a memoir I commissioned for my own book on British science fiction history. The titles, he told me, were good ones. The covers, by Gerard Quinn, were tasteful and well suited for a better class paperback market. The only trouble was that we couldn't get adequate distribution. The magazines went through the newspaper magazine distributing channels to end up mainly in newsagents, where paperback sales were limited to westerns, thrillers and romances. Science fiction paperbacks had to go through book buying channels to end up primarily in bookshops and on the big railway station bookstalls. The big book buyers like W.H. Smith and others were just beginning to experience the first impacts of the mushroom paperback explosion, and were not sympathetic towards science fiction and refused to buy. So the series was discontinued, virtually stillborn. This was a tragedy. As we can see, the books were perfect bound. They were not stapled like the mushroom products. They used better quality paper, and though they were now priced at 2 shilling, they were a full 160 pages. And instead of adverts for jock straps and bust cream, they ran author photographs and biographies. There we see Wilson Tucker, famous American author. A.E. Van Voort was featured in this one. James Blish, an up-and-coming American author who became very famous later on in his career, was featured. And Theodore Sturgeon was a leading American writer and a Hugo Award winner. And these books should have been bestsellers, certainly deserved to be. But sadly, this effort to produce quality paperbacks was to no avail. And here we can see that Nova, 2 years later, well into 1957, was still trying to sell back issues of the unsold line. Now, dealers and collectors alike have shamefully overlooked this series of paperbacks, preferring to sell rubbish by the mushroom publishers at inflated prices. Go figure.